Thanks, Eric. We have with us a K-State Research and Extension beef specialist, Dale Blasi, here to talk about some procedures cowherd ranchers should keep in mind during this hot month. Dale, let's start with cowherd nutrition. Keeping plenty of clean and fresh water is pretty critical right now, correct?
Absolutely. Water is an essential nutrient for animals, and all too many times we take for granted that it's available, but especially as hot as it's been over the last month or so, it's incumbent upon all producers to ensure that their animals do have an adequate and dependable supply of water.
And can you give some examples of how they can make sure that they have clean and fresh water?
Well, I mean, it's depending upon, again, with the rains that we've received in many parts of the state, we have perhaps a lot of creeks that might be running water, and there might be some ponds and stuff, but just to ensure that everything is operational, that there's moving water that's fresh, not stagnant, I think is all very important to ensure that their animals, especially with mineral being provided out in the pasture, if there's an abrupt change in intake of the mineral in terms of reduced intake, there's probably a symptom that they're not getting sufficient moisture in their system. So, again, it's just part of being a good manager to ensure that water troughs, tanks, everything is operational and working well.
Right, and you've mentioned just now some minerals. How can herdsmen make sure that minerals are accessible to their cowherd?
Well, I mean, we use, for example, a Stockmaster self-fed mineral tub that has a cover on it, and the animals, over time, they get used to lifting the cover to actually gain the access to the mineral inside. But we send our hired help weekly around to double check, look for contaminated mineral, that being any urine or feces that's contaminated in the mineral. We keep it fairly clean. We also, like I said, with all the storms we've received, you can find a lot of your mineral feeders, if they're not covered, they'll get filled with water, and obviously the mineral's contaminated, and you have to start over again.
Right.
But it's just, again, basic staying on task and checking at least every 2 or so days on animals on grass to make sure. And certainly animals that are in pens, it's incumbent that producers check their animals once, if not twice a day, as they're doing their routine feeding.
And for grazing animals, how should one monitor grazing conditions?
Well, typically, again, we've come out of a drought. Since April, May, we've seen incredible amounts of moisture in many parts of the state. Unfortunately, not so much in the northwest part of the state. They haven't received the levels that we have here in this neck of the woods. But again, that's pre-targeted. We stock typically, we shoot for about 250 pounds of beef to the acre, and we know that once the grass starts to mature, and this time of the year, the grass is wanting to shoot a seed head, and we have to be cognizant of the importance of that grass plant refurbishing its carbohydrate reserves in the root level. So again, monitoring and staying on task and ensuring that you're leaving plenty of cover, plenty of vegetation that can recoup and reinvigorate the plant, if you will, prior to going into winter is critical.
Now we'll move on to some herd health things that you should keep in mind. First off, let's start with fly control. What are some options people can take?
Many options are a lot of folks consider in the early part of the grazing season, and we have ear tags, we have some injectable products that are available out there for use. And many ear tags, by now, the efficacy is fairly well low, and this is the time that many of the experts are concerned about breeding the resistance, if you will, into those. So, rotating the family groups of chemicals that are available in the tags year in and year out is a step forward to keeping the fly population as susceptible to the chemical families as possible. Other thing is the density of stocking and rotating and removing the fecal pats and trying to reduce the existing loads that are there. There are some injectable products that are more long-term. If you go to the label, manufacturer's label, they're saying upwards of 150 days control, and some work we did last year with a particular product, we saw a respectable reduction in fly counts from the use of this product. We use dust at times. Some people feed a larvicide inside the mineral to try to keep the fly counts to a minimum. There's a lot of options. We're getting towards the end of our grazing season now. Granted, we still have, another 3 months or so before our first frost. So, again, ensuring that we're staying on top, checking the animals. I've done a lot of the dust myself, obviously staying upwind when I bring cows in together with, say, a few pounds of cubes to line them up. I think there's some short-term things that you can do. But again, in and year out, I think altering chemical families with the tags and also looking at some of these newer generation injectables are a means by which to reduce and keep a hold of fly populations.
And one thing that goes hand in hand with fly control is heat stress. So let's take some time and expand on how herdsmen can help reduce that.
The heat stress that we've experienced in Kansas, and we hear about, at least here in the last week or two, I'm aware of a few feed yards that have experienced some deaths as a consequence. And it's a function of the feedlot cattle that in many cases they don't have the luxury of shade. A lot of them may use techniques to put a little bit of moisture into the air to try to not create an oven environment where animals are baking, but to try to improve or reduce the effective the temperature that impacts those animals. As I said, the temperature is a combination of the humidity and the temperature itself, and those two factors together play a large role on impacting animals. Now, providing shade, using cheaper black lined cloth, there's been a million ways of setting things up to allow animals the opportunity to get out of the direct sunshine is, I think, the first thing a person can do. We conducted 2 trials last year, and it really wasn't that hot of a summer compared to this year. But we saw a reduction in about 40 degrees at ground level between shaded versus unshaded materials at the pen surface. So we know that if animals have access to shade, that's a huge step in the right beginning. So animals on pasture, assuming there's a few trees and stuff, and again, access to water, as we discussed earlier, Charles Lee, you just got to stay on top of that and be cognizant of when these days are being forecasted by our weathermen.
So you've mentioned water, and that's a good forage and pasture management. Is there other kind of things that people might need to watch out for?
Well, you brought up a good point, just ensuring there's adequate resources left, removing the animals at a time that allows the plant to recharge itself before we get into the first killing frost. I think all those things are very important.
Herdsmen should keep in mind all of these tips and make sure that you're keeping a close eye on your herd during this hot summer month. Well, thanks, Dale. And for Agriculture Today, I'm Charles C. Craig.